Okay, good morning, DC 030 students. This is Katie Birch, your cooperative education teacher for creating opportunities through co-op. We are already on to topic 6. I think we're on about the 8th lesson, so we're 2 weeks in now. We're talking today about employment standards and human rights. So this is one of my favorite topics. Really looking forward to having you guys really think about what your rights are as an employee and as just a human being. Again, to communicate with me is very important in this course. Here's my information listed on this page. Please email me, call me, text me, send me a message on Google Classroom. Just reach me somehow and stay on top of your coursework. All right, all of our classes are hosted in Google Classroom at www.classroom.google.com. To log into your classroom, you just need to do first name, last name, month of your birth, day of your birth at nnecschools.org. All right, here's what we're covering today: employment standards and human rights. We're going to do the Employment Standards Act, have a little chat about that. What are your rights as an employee through the Ontario Employment Standards? There's also federal employment standards that sometimes fall for employees that are hired through the federal government. And then we're going to do a scavenger hunt, or we're going to start you off on it, and you're going to go and do that on your own. We're also talking about the Ontario Human Rights Code and the general world human rights. Like, there's certain human rights that every human should have. Whether or not they actually have them, well, that's debated. But certain rights and conditions that all humans should have access to. And then we're going to talk about making decisions. So I have a model that we're going to work through called the ideal decision-making model. It just helps you work through making decisions. Sometimes it can be hard to make a decision. So I'm going to give you a strategy to help you make decisions today. Okay, we're going to talk. In topic 4, you learned about all the regulations around workplace safety. Maybe you thought that was it. No more regulations. You were wrong. The fun is just beginning. Regulations might seem boring, but they're really necessary for you to have a safe, successful co-op experience. So regulations don't just protect you from physical dangers, they help make your workplace more fair and more equitable. We're going to have a look at this conversation between Khalil and Eddie. So let's just read it and take a look. Must be nice to have that much energy. I'm exhausted. Eddie, what happened? Khalil, 3 very long 9-hour days at my work without a break is what happened. Eddie, you need to check that out. I don't think that's legal. Khalil, okay, maybe you're right. I'll check it out after I sleep. So in this topic, you're going to learn more about situations like Khalil and Eddie's. You'll also learn how to protect your human rights at work. Just as it's against the law to allow unsafe working conditions, it's also illegal to provide a working atmosphere where discrimination and prejudice are the forefront. So what you're going to do today is prepare yourself with the knowledge and what you'll be able to do to avoid most problems if you run into them on the job. All right, let's talk about Khalil and Eddie. Do you think Khalil is entitled to a break? Yeah, so do you think Khalil is entitled to a break? If so, how many hours do you think? Why don't you just think about that for a minute? How many hours do you think a full-time employee should work in an average week? 50, 40, 37 and a half, 70? What do you think? What do you think overtime is? Should you get paid for overtime? Do you assume that all bosses will uphold your rights in the workplace? Can you make that assumption? Do they even know what your rights are? Okay, so think about that. Take a minute just to reflect on those questions, and hopefully by the end of today's lesson, you'll have an answer for that. All right, we're going to talk the Employment Standards Act. So the Employment Standard Act is a set of laws in Ontario. There are federal Employment Standards Acts, which we're going to talk about at the end, but it's a set of laws in Ontario that determine minimum standards for working conditions. Very similar laws exist across all provinces in Canada. The Act addresses issues like minimum wage, overtime pay, who gets it and when, payroll deductions, taxes, vacation, holidays, union dues, and parental leave. So the Employment Standard Act also specifies if you're eligible for any termination pay. Termination pay is given to a worker whose employment is being ended if the employer chooses not to give the required notice. So we're going to take a look at a video. Since instead of you listening to me about the Employment Standards Act, I'm going to just have you watch this video about what's covered under the Employment Standards Act, and then we're going to have a little chat about it afterwards. We're going to do a little scavenger hunt.
Hi, I'm Camille Sandana, an Employment Standards Officer with the Ministry of Labour. Most employees in Ontario are protected by the Employment Standards Act, or ESA. It sets out minimum standards for workplaces. Over the next few minutes, I'll give you some helpful information about your rights under the ESA. You'll learn how it may apply to you and also where to find additional resources. You may have greater rights under other legislation or the common law. To help ensure that employers understand their obligations and employees know their rights, the Ministry has prepared the Employment Standards Poster, which briefly describes some of the employment standards in Ontario. The poster is available for free online in English and many other languages. To learn more about the poster requirements or to download the poster, visit ontario.ca/ESA poster. To see if they apply to you, try the guide to special rules and exemptions available on our website.
Boss is making me work 10 hours again today. Can she just do that whenever she wants?
I don't know. She does that to me all the time, too. In Ontario, there are daily and weekly limits to how long you can be asked to work. For most jobs, the daily limit is 8 hours, or the number of hours in an established regular workday if it's longer than 8 hours. The daily maximum can only be exceeded if you agree in writing, including electronically. The weekly limit for most jobs is 48 hours, but you can work more if certain conditions are met. Your employer needs to receive your written agreement. They must supply you with information about your rights before you sign. And for most jobs, after 44 hours of work in a work week, you must receive overtime pay. The overtime rate must be at least 1.5 times your regular rate of pay. Eating periods are also regulated by the ESA. Most employees must not work more than 5 consecutive hours without a 30-minute unpaid eating period. You can learn more about overtime, eating periods, and the daily and weekly limits at ontario.ca/hours of work.
Well, you got the job, but times are tough, so I can only give you $10 an hour.
That's not even minimum wage.
Most employees are entitled to be paid at least the general minimum wage. However, there are different minimum wage rates for students, liquor servers, home workers, and hunting and fishing guides. For current rates, visit ontario.ca/minimum wage.
So I haven't been paid in 3 weeks. My rent is coming up due. When am I going to get paid next?
Employers must establish a regular pay period and pay employees on a regular pay day. An employer can pay wages by cash, check, or direct deposit into your bank account. You must also be provided with a pay stub or a wage statement on or before the established pay day. The pay stub lists both the wages and any deductions made in the pay period. Only certain kind of deductions are allowed to be taken from your wages. You can watch the Ministry of Labour's video, Illegal Deductions from Wages, on the Government of Ontario's YouTube channel to find out more.
Hey Karen, how are you? Hi, Camille. How long do you have to work here to get a vacation? I think it's about a year.
Generally, after completing each 12-month period of work, employees with less than 5 years of employment are entitled to 2 weeks of vacation time, and employees with 5 or more years of employment are entitled to 3 weeks. In most cases, employees with less than 5 years of employment are also entitled to receive vacation pay, which is at least 4% of gross wages earned in the vacation entitlement year. while employees with 5 or more years are entitled to receive vacation pay, which is at least 6% of gross wages earned in the vacation entitlement year. The vacation pay earned must be paid to an employee in a lump sum before they take vacation time. But if you and your employer agree, electronically or in writing, vacation pay can be paid on each paycheck or at any other time. To learn more about vacation time and pay, read the vacation chapter in your guide to the Employment Standards Act, available at ontario.ca/vacation.
Working this holiday, it's so busy today.
At least we get paid extra.
Yeah.
There are 9 public holidays in Ontario every year. Most employees are entitled to take these days off. Some employees work in industries where they may have to work on a public holiday. If you're asked to work on a public holiday, you may be entitled to either your regular pay plus a different day off with public holiday pay, or public holiday pay plus premium pay, which is at least 1.5 times your regular rate for each hour worked on the holiday. To learn more about public holidays, read the public holiday chapter in your guide to the Employment Standards Act, available at ontario.ca/public holidays.
I've only worked here for 6 months. Do you know if I can take a leave? I don't know. That's a really good question.
If you're protected by the ESA, you have the right to take unpaid time off as a leave of absence for certain reasons. It doesn't matter if you're a full-time, part-time, permanent, or term contract employee. There are a number of different leaves you may be entitled to, such as pregnancy, parental, family responsibility, bereavement, family caregiver, family medical, or sick leave. Your employer can't punish or terminate you for taking a protected leave, and in most cases, they must return you to your job when your leave is over. Information on all the different leaves of absence is available in your guide to the Employment Standards Act.
Hello, you asked to see me?
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for coming. You're a good employee and have been for the last 4 years. Unfortunately, the business is no longer profitable. I'm going to have to let you go. Sadly, 4 weeks from today will be your last day. Here's your written notice.
In most cases, if you're terminated, your employer must give either notice of termination, termination pay, or a combination of both. The amount you may be entitled to depends on how long you worked for your employer. You're only eligible if you've been employed continuously for at least 3 months. Please note, the ESA establishes only minimum employment standards. You may also have rights under the common law or other legislation. To find out if you might be entitled to termination notice or pay, try our termination tool, available at ontario.ca/ESA tools.
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
I heard you were going to ask the boss to start paying you overtime pay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Why not?
The last guy who asked about getting his overtime pay was fired.
Really? Oh, thanks.
No problem.
It is illegal for your employer to penalize you for exercising your rights under the Employment Standards Act or for asking about them. That means your employer cannot intimidate you, fire you, suspend you, punish you, or threaten any of these actions for exercising your rights or asking about them. If your employer does, it's called a reprisal, and your employer can be ordered by an employment standards officer to compensate you for any loss incurred because of a reprisal, reinstate you to your job, or both compensate and reinstate you.
Hi, Sue.
Hi.
So my last day is on Friday. I wonder when I'm supposed to get my last paycheck.
If you have a question about the ESA or need information on how to file a claim, you can contact the Employment Standards Information Center at 1-800-531-5551. Information Center staff can help you understand your rights and answer your questions in English, French, and many other languages. When you call, you don't have to provide your name or the name of your employer. And remember, your employer cannot punish you for talking to the Ministry of Labor. If you believe that you have not received your entitlements under the ESA, you can file a claim. A claim can be filed with the ministry in a number of different ways. To access the Employment Standards Claim Form, visit ontario.ca/ESA forms. Unionized employees should talk to their union representative for help with their issue. There are other ESA rights and special rules that I haven't touched on, including severance pay and rules for assignment employees of temporary help agencies. For more information on all your rights, please visit our website, ontario.ca/employment standards, or call our information center, 1-800-531-5551. Information is available in English, French, and many other languages.
Awesome. So as you can see, this video referred to the Employment Standards Act quite often. So you'll actually get access to the Employment Standards Act in our next task that we're going to work on. So now that you learned about all the things that are a part of the Employment Standards Act, I mean, most of the main ones is what we covered through that video. What you're going to do is I have links to each of the sections in Google Classroom to send you on a scavenger hunt. So let's move over to Google Classroom. I'm going to go in as my demo student. Okay, there's Classroom. We're going to go and we're doing scavenger hunt. So we're on topic 6. So we're going to go classwork. We're going down to topic 6 and we're doing the Employment Standards Act scavenger hunt. So all you have to do is click on it, view assignment, open up the assignment, and you'll see all the links and questions are right there for you. So to access the Employment Standards Act or the Ontario labor laws, you can click there. But we're just going to answer the questions together. What kinds of workers are not covered by the Employment Standards Act? So if you're not sure, it's going to open up a new tab. The link is right there for you. Okay, industries and jobs with exemptions or special rules. Okay, there are some employers who are not covered by them, and here they are. Special rules for these people. So all you have to do is copy that information. It's healthcare, transportation, government, and that's because all of those people probably fall under the federal rule. So all you have to do is put that information in there. So we're just really going to be scavenger hunting around for the answers here. Okay, the next question is, what is the general minimum wage? List 3 exemptions to the wage. So we're going to go to that website from the Employment Standards Act, and we're going to check out minimum wage. Okay, so the general minimum wage, we're October 2021. So I think we'll call it October 1st. The minimum wage is going to be $14.35 an hour for adults. Okay, for adults. Okay. Still not very high. It's really not that much to live on at $14 an hour. And then 3 exemptions to the wage are for students, it's $13 an hour. So that's different. That's an exemption. Whoops, throwing speakers around here. And then liquor servers, the reason why they get less an hour is because there's the anticipation that they get tips. Okay, so you're just going to fill that information in, and also you can see that home workers' wage, same thing. It's funny that home workers' wage is slightly more than a minimum wage because maybe they factor in that you're using your home as part of your business. So 3 exemptions. For different types of jobs, there are some exemptions. Okay, then we're going to go through list 3 of the many rights that workers have under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Okay, so roles and responsibilities, 3 rights of workers. The right to know is one of them. Okay, the right to know about the hazards in their job, the right to participate in solving health and safety problems, and the right to refuse work. That's a big one. That's one of them, the right to know. The next one is the right to participate. Okay, workers have the right to be part of the process, identifying and resolving workplace health and safety concerns. So you have a right as a worker to participate. And the third one is the right to refuse. This is really important. Workers have the right to refuse work that they believe is dangerous to either their own health and safety or that of another worker. And we talked about that through workplace health and safety as well. So those are the 3 rights that workers have. And you just fill it in that form. Okay. And the rest, I think I'm going to leave you on your own to fill in. We're talking about what's the minimum age for the following jobs. Different jobs have different ages. This is really important. I have a 14-year-old. I need to know what kind of jobs can he apply for that he can safely do. Okay. Then there's a couple of scenarios, and I'm going to get you to fill in the rest yourself. I would suggest pausing the video at this point and working on your information scavenger hunt. All the links are there for you. It's very simple. You're going to do that in Google Classroom. Okay, we're going to talk really briefly about the federal labor standards because part of the Canadian Labor Code talks about federal standards, and these are conditions for people who are in federally regulated businesses. And in your case, if you're working in a First Nations community that is funded through federal dollars, these labor standards and laws apply to you as well. So we're going to watch this quick little video just to remind you that the labor standards are there also for federal employees. And then we're going to jump into human rights here.
Most people know that there are laws that govern their workplace. What's a little less known is that not all employees and employers are subject to the same employment standards laws. I'm Paula Krauss. I'm a lawyer at Kent Employment Law, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between provincial and federal laws when it comes to the workplace. So I'm really going to focus today on the Employment Standards Act in BC versus the Canada Labor Code, which is a federal or Canadian piece of legislation. So both govern workplaces. They govern what rights and obligations employees and employers have in the workplace. So the Employment Standards Act, it applies to provincially regulated employees, and the Canada Labor Code applies to federally regulated employees. It's easier to sort of define what federally regulated is, and then everything else is provincially regulated. So federal employees and federal employers are those working in industries like railway, marine transportation, airlines, industries that cross borders, cross provincial borders. And then there are banks, First Nations bands, and other First Nations organizations. Those are all federally regulated, and so they fall under the Canada Labor Code. It's important to know as an employer or employee which one you fall under because the entitlements are, the benefits and the entitlements for employees are different under both. Both have slightly different notice of termination and termination pay provisions. Both have different severance provisions. One actually doesn't. The Employment Standards Act doesn't. And they both have different entitlements to leaves, sick leave, parental leave, mat leave, things like that. And one big characteristic of the Canada Labor Code is its unjust dismissal provisions, which protect employees against arbitrary dismissal. So if you are an employee or an employer and you need or want to know more about your benefits or obligations under your employment standards laws and want to know which one applies to you, contact us at Kent Employment Law and we can help you through that.
Okay, well, you don't need to do that. You don't need to contact Kent Employment Law, but certainly looking at your rights as a federal employee versus your rights as a provincial employee, they're not overly different, but they do differ. Like the Employment Standards Act doesn't have, like she said, severance allowances. Okay, that is your rights. And it is really important to take the time to remind yourself of your rights because you can be put in lots of precarious situations as an employee where an employer has these certain expectations, and knowing your rights helps keep you safe, but it also helps you from, getting into trouble if there's an accident or something that happens. Okay, besides employment rights, there are these things called human rights that are basic human rights. And it's different for every country. Not everybody has the same human rights, even though the policies state that you should have these rights, like access to water, access to housing, and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of human rights that you have as an Ontario resident, but also just as a Canadian citizen. And that's these are things that people cannot discriminate against you for. They can't discriminate you against your race. So any external features, your hair, your facial characteristics, your skin color, that is not allowed. Discriminating people on their family descent, their ancestry, is also not allowed in Ontario. Now, these are all connected to, there is a worldwide Declaration of Human Rights, which we're going to learn about a little bit in a minute here. We're going to watch a video. But in Ontario, these have been specifically listed in the Ontario Code of Human Rights. So the color of your skin, ethnic origin, your citizenship. You can't be prohibited or discriminated against based on citizenship. You can't be discriminated based on your religion. You can't be discriminated based on your sex or gender, your sexual orientation, your disability. If you have a physical or an injury or an illness or birth defect, you cannot be discriminated based on that. How do you prove it? That's a good question. You really just need to know your rights. Knowing your rights helps you stand up for your rights, really. Age, you can't be discriminated based on your age. Marital status, who you live with, who you don't live with, if you're widowed or separated. You can't be discriminated on your family status, your parent-child relationship. Provincial offenses or pardon offenses, you can't be discriminated based on your record of offenses. Okay, and your receipt of public assistance. So housing only, you can't be discriminated based on you being using or utilizing public assistance. You know, there's many infractions that still happen in Canada, which is super sad, but also across the world. And we're going to learn a little bit about the Human Rights Code across the world and just sort of think about how that impacts other people in other countries. We're very fortunate in Canada to be part of a really great Ontario and Canadian Human Rights Code, but not every country is treated equally, and people in every country are treated equally. So we're going to learn a little bit about human rights, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use what we've learned about employee rights and human rights, and we're going to sort of go through some scenarios together and make some decisions. So let's watch.
The idea of human rights is that each one of us, no matter who we are or where we are born, is entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms. Human rights are not privileges, and they cannot be granted or revoked. They are inalienable and universal. That may sound straightforward enough, but it gets incredibly complicated as soon as anyone tries to put the idea into practice. What exactly are the basic human rights? Who gets to pick them? Who enforces them? And how? The history behind the concept of human rights is a long one. Throughout the centuries and across societies, religions, and cultures, we have struggled with defining notions of rightfulness, justice, and rights. But one of the most modern affirmations of universal human rights emerged from the ruins of World War II with the creation of the United Nations. The treaty that established the UN gives as one of its purposes to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. And with the same spirit, in 1948, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document, written by an international committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, lays the basis for modern international human rights law. The Declaration is based on the principle that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. It lists 30 articles recognizing, among other things, the principle of non-discrimination and the right to life and liberty. It refers to negative freedoms, like the freedom from torture or slavery, as well as positive freedoms, such as the freedom of movement and residence. It encompasses basic civil and political rights, such as freedom of expression, religion, or peaceful assembly, as well as social, economic, and cultural rights, such as the right to education and the right to freely choose one's occupation and be paid and treated fairly. The Declaration takes no sides as to which rights are more important, insisting on their universality, indivisibility, and interdependence. And in the past decades, international human rights law has grown, deepening and expanding our understanding of what human rights are and how to better protect them. So if these principles are so well developed, then why are human rights abused and ignored time and time again all over the world? The problem, in general, is that it is not at all easy to universally enforce these rights or to punish transgressors. The UDHR itself, despite being highly authoritative and respected, is a declaration, not a hard law. So when individual countries violate it, the mechanisms to address those violations are weak. For example, the main bodies within the UN in charge of protecting human rights mostly monitor and investigate violations, but they cannot force states to, say, change a policy or compensate a victim. That's why some critics say it's naive to consider human rights a given in a world where state interests wield so much power. Critics also question the universality of human rights and emphasize that their development has been heavily guided by a small number of mostly Western nations to the detriment of inclusiveness. The result? A general bias in favor of civil political liberties over socio-political rights and of individual over collective or groups' rights. Others defend universal human rights laws and point at the positive role they have on setting international standards and helping activists in their campaigns. They also point out that not all international human rights instruments are powerless. For example, the European Convention on Human Rights establishes a court where the 47 member countries and their citizens can bring cases. The court issues binding decisions that each member state must comply with. Human rights law is constantly evolving, as are our views and definitions of what the basic human rights should be. For example, how basic or important is the right to democracy or to development? And as our lives are increasingly digital, should there be a right to access the internet? A right to digital privacy? What do you think?
Okay, that gives us lots to think about around human rights. So even though there is the Declaration of Human Rights, like I mentioned before, whether or not countries abide by those rights is another thing to consider, especially when we consider what's happening in Afghanistan when the Americans pulled out and the Taliban has now taken over and women can no longer attend university with men. They're separated. Okay, women have the right to education just as men do, and we're finding that that's declining now. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to make decisions, how to identify a problem, how to describe how you might solve it, how to evaluate all possible solutions, how to act on the solution, and to learn from your choices. So we're going to go through, you guys are going to be working on some decisions, making decisions today. So we're going to use the ideal decision-making model. We're going to take a look at scenario 1. And then you guys are going to go and for the rest of the class, work on the other scenarios as part of your final assignment for this section of class. Okay, here we go. Ronald is working as an apprentice in the hair salon. He's enjoying his work, but one of his coworkers keeps saying, "That's so gay," to everything, and Ronald is starting to feel it's an attack on his sexuality. What should Ronald do? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the problem. So the problem is the coworker is using discriminatory language, stating, "That's so gay," and Ronald feels that it is an attack on his sexuality. Okay, so this is the problem. How might we solve the problem? So we can come up with a couple of solutions. So what could he do? He could speak to the coworker. He could look at the work policies on discrimination. He could also go to his supervisor and talk about his concerns. And another thing he could do is he could also run a workshop on appropriate workplace language. Maybe people just don't know. Okay, so there's 4 options that Ronald could do to try and solve that problem. Now we're going to take a look at, we identified the problem, we described how we might solve it. Now we're going to evaluate the possible solutions. So if Ronald speaks to a coworker, maybe it will be scary, but the coworker may change how he or she talks, but no one else in the workplace will have this knowledge. Okay, if he runs a workshop, how would that work? So you're going to work through that scenario. If he runs a workshop, then maybe as a workplace, they can work on their language and make it a learning opportunity. But he would need to get permission from his boss, and it's also scary. Maybe you're not used to presenting. Okay. Okay, what's the next thing he could do? Okay, look up work policies on discrimination and go to his supervisor. We're going to call that go to employer. Talk it through and come up with a solution together. Okay, so at this point, does it mean one decision is right against another? Not necessarily. I think it just depends on what you feel comfortable as a worker doing. And in this case, Ronald may decide to pick one of these options. So identify the problem, describe how you might solve it, evaluate all the solutions, and act on one of the solutions. So we're going to say that what's happened is Ronald is going to go to his employer, okay, talk through a solution, and the employer suggested that it come up at the next staff meeting. And instead of having Ronald do workplace language, he's going to have a professional. Okay, so he went to the employer, talked it through, and the employer suggests that they come up in the next staff meeting and have a professional come in and talk about appropriate language at work. And then they're going to amend the work policies around discrimination. Great. That's a great solution. So sometimes just taking the time to write these things down and find a solution is really, really a good strategy. And then the last thing is learn from your choices. So after you've done that decision, how did it go? Did it work? Would you change anything? So obviously you're not going to be able to do this last scenario, and maybe you can just make up how you think which choice you would choose. But yeah, so that's what you're going to do is you're going to run through those scenarios. You're going to go to Google Classroom and you're going to open the ideal decision-making model. There it is there. Let's log in. Almost done. Okay, classwork, topic 6. We're going to do ideal decision making. You also need to go and answer this question too about the difference between the employment standards. Find one difference between ESA and the federal labor standards. So you're going to open the assignment. Okay, we already answered Ronald. You're going to go and do the other 2 scenarios and then submit it for marking. Just make sure you click turn in so I get notified that it's ready to go. All right, so that is your task for today. We're at 9:42, so we're at 45 minutes into this class. As I said, don't be shy. Reach out if you need help. This work is fairly easy, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time to complete. So get in there, work on your assignments. We're working on topic 6 assignments today. And yeah, get them submitted as soon as you can. As soon as all this work gets done, you guys get to start collecting your work placement hours. We just need to talk a little bit about your portfolio and tracking your timesheets. Once we get to topic 9, we just have about 3 more lessons, and then you can start collecting your work hours. All right, we'll see you in class next time. Have a super day and get your work done. I think you'll enjoy these tasks.